Robert Schuller is buried in the ground beneath a Catholic cathedral he never built for Catholics. The same 34-acre campus he once constructed completely debt-free. By the time he died in 2015, he had been fired from his own board by his own daughter. He had filed personal bankruptcy. He had sued his own church for $5 million. And he had testified against his own ministry in federal bankruptcy court. His funeral was held outside the building. The cathedral was closed for Catholic renovation. Robert Schuller, the man who invented the modern megachurch, could not even be buried from inside his own church. This is what the final 3 years of his life looked like. And the story of how it all collapsed is documented in bankruptcy filings, court records, and public statements from the family members who tore each other apart. But to understand how he lost everything so fast, you first need to understand what he built, and why that very success became the weapon that destroyed him. Robert Harold Schuller was born in 1926 on a farm in Alton, Iowa. No running water, no electricity. His family survived the Great Depression working that land. They were Dutch Reformed, deeply religious, and deeply poor. Schuller later said those years taught him that faith and optimism were the only things that could not be taken away. He was ordained in the Reformed Church in America and sent to California in 1955 with a simple assignment: start a church. He had no building, no congregation. He had $80 and a wife named Arvella who would stand beside him for the next 60 years. What he found was the Orange Drive-In Theater in Garden Grove. He rented it for $10 a Sunday. He climbed onto the roof of the snack bar and preached his first sermon to cars. Families stayed in their vehicles. They honked their horns instead of saying amen. His first offering totaled $83.75. His slogan was simple: come as you are in the family car. It worked. People who felt uncomfortable in traditional churches felt welcome at the drive-in. No dress-up, no pews, no judgment. The congregation grew fast. Within 5 years, Schuller had outgrown the drive-in. He hired one of the most famous architects in America. And he built something no one had ever seen before. But that building would eventually become his tombstone. That story comes next. By 1961, Robert Schuller had raised $3 million. He hired Richard Neutra, one of the most famous architects in America, to design his first permanent church. The building was modernist, dramatic, unlike any church most Americans had ever seen. By 1968, he built the 13-story Tower of Hope, the tallest structure in Orange County. It housed a 24-hour telephone counseling ministry. Then in 1970, he launched the Hour of Power television broadcast. Billy Graham himself encouraged him to do it. Graham saw what Schuller was building and told him the future of ministry was on television. Within a decade, Hour of Power reached 20 million viewers in 156 countries. Every Sunday, Robert Schuller stood in his flowing robes and delivered what he called possibility thinking. Positive psychology wrapped in spiritual optimism. No hellfire, no guilt, no condemnation, just encouragement. Dream it, believe it, achieve it. But his critics called it watered-down Christianity. And while the cameras kept rolling, Schuller was already dreaming bigger, much bigger. That dream would become the most beautiful church in America. And the most expensive mistake he ever made. The theology was controversial among traditional Christians. Schuller rarely mentioned sin. He avoided words like repentance and judgment. He preferred to talk about self-esteem, potential, and personal transformation. His supporters called it accessible faith. His critics called it dangerous. But the crowds kept coming. He met with every president from Gerald Ford to George W. Bush. He was photographed with world leaders, celebrities, and royalty. Hour of Power became the most watched religious broadcast in America. And Robert Schuller became the most recognizable face in Protestant Christianity. But he needed a bigger stage. By the late 1970s, the Neutra Church was too small. Schuller had a vision for something unprecedented. A building with no roof between the congregation and the sky. A sanctuary that would make people feel like they were worshiping outdoors. He hired Philip Johnson, one of the most celebrated architects in the world. Johnson had designed landmarks across America, but he had never designed a church quite like what Schuller was describing. The result was the Crystal Cathedral. 10,660 panes of tempered silver glass. Seating for 2,248 people. The largest glass building in the world at the time. And Schuller raised every penny before the doors opened. Debt-free. No mortgage. No loans. That detail matters. Remember it. Because in 3 years, that debt-free miracle would become a $50 million nightmare. The Crystal Cathedral opened in 1981, completely debt-free. Inside sat the Hazel Wright organ, one of the largest pipe organs in the Western Hemisphere. Over 16,000 pipes. The sound filled every inch of that glass sanctuary. Natural light flooded every corner. On sunny days, the interior glowed. On cloudy days, it felt like worshipping inside a cloud. Schuller kept building. A visitor center. Office buildings. A 236-foot bell tower that could be seen from the freeway. The campus grew to 34 acres. Every Easter, the Glory of Easter pageant brought live camels, horses, flying angels, and Roman centurions into the sanctuary. Audiences watched the crucifixion and resurrection dramatized with Hollywood production values. Every Christmas, the Glory of Christmas drew thousands more. Tickets cost $45 each. The productions became legendary. Visitors came from around the world. At its peak, Crystal Cathedral Ministries employed over 600 people. The congregation exceeded 10,000 members. Donations poured in from viewers who never set foot in California. And Robert Schuller stood at the center of it all. But behind the glass walls, a time bomb was ticking. And it had a last name, Schuller. For 3 decades, it worked. The bills got paid. The productions got bigger. The audience kept growing. Then came the handoff. In 2006, Robert Schuller retired at age 80. He handed the pulpit to his son, Robert A. Schuller. Father to son, dynasty to heir. It was supposed to be smooth. The younger Schuller had been groomed for this moment. He worked in the ministry for years. He understood the audience. He knew the brand. It lasted 2 years. In 2008, the elder Schuller publicly removed his son as senior pastor. The stated reason: a lack of shared vision. The father wanted to preserve the Hour of Power format exactly as it was. The son wanted to update it for a new generation. But everyone watching saw something deeper. A family tearing itself apart over money, control, and legacy. Board meetings became battlegrounds. Staff were forced to choose sides. Loyalty to the father meant disloyalty to the son. Some employees who worked at Crystal Cathedral for decades resigned rather than participate in the Civil War. And the cameras kept rolling. But here is where the story turns from sad to catastrophic. 3 months. That is all it took. The Schuller children, once presented as the perfect Christian family on Hour of Power broadcasts, fractured into competing factions. Robert Schuller started his own church. He felt betrayed by his father. He told reporters he had been set up to fail. The congregation watched it happen in real time. Attendance dropped. Donations slowed. People who had given to Crystal Cathedral for 30 years started asking questions about where their money was going. Then came July 2010. Robert Schuller's daughter, Sheila Schuller Coleman, took over leadership of Crystal Cathedral Ministries. She promised stability. She promised a return to the glory days. She promised to heal the family wounds and restore the ministry to its former greatness. 3 months later, she filed for bankruptcy. 3 months. That is the time between new leadership and public admission that the empire was broke. The building that Robert Schuller dedicated debt-free in 1981 was now drowning in liabilities. How did that happen? Who mortgaged the glass palace? And where did the money go? The answers are in the bankruptcy filings. And they are devastating. October 2010. Sheila Schuller Coleman had been in charge for just 3 months. Then she walked into a federal bankruptcy court and filed. The building that Robert Schuller dedicated debt-free in 1981 was now drowning in liabilities. The bankruptcy filings revealed the damage. $43 million in debt. $36 million of that was mortgage debt on the campus. Wait, mortgage debt? Remember earlier when we said Schuller built the Crystal Cathedral without borrowing a single dollar? That was true in 1981. But somewhere along the way, someone mortgaged the property. Someone borrowed against the glass palace. The largest creditors were television stations. Hour of Power had been hemorrhaging money for years just to stay on the air. Broadcasting to 156 countries is not cheap. As viewership declined, advertising revenue disappeared. But the ministry kept paying for airtime it could no longer afford. The Great Recession of 2008 gutted donations. The congregation was aging and shrinking. People in their 70s and 80s, the core of Schuller's audience, were dying or moving into care facilities. Their children were not replacing them. Attendance dropped by more than half. But here is what the family did not want you to see. Keep watching. Hour of Power viewership collapsed. The 20 million viewers became 5 million, then fewer. 140 staff members were laid off. The orchestra was dismissed. The choir was let go. Musicians and singers who had performed at Crystal Cathedral for decades were told their services were no longer needed. The Glory of Easter pageant, a tradition that had run for decades, was cancelled for the first time in the ministry's history. No more live camels. No more flying angels. No more Roman centurions. But buried in those bankruptcy filings was something else. Something the Schuller family did not want anyone to see. Multiple members of the Schuller family had been drawing generous salaries from the ministry for years. Some received tax-free housing allowances on top of their pay, even as donations dried up, even as debts piled higher, even as staff were being laid off and creditors went unpaid. The family payroll kept running. Then things got worse. Much worse. In 2011, Sheila Schuller Coleman ousted her own father from the Crystal Cathedral board. Robert and Arvella Schuller were in their 80s. They had given their entire lives to that church. And their own daughter removed them. But Robert was not finished fighting. He still had one card to play. And it shocked everyone. Robert and Arvella Schuller filed for personal bankruptcy. The man who told millions to dream it and achieve it could not pay his own bills. Then Robert Schuller filed a $5 million claim against his own church. He argued that the ministry owed him for intellectual property, his sermons, his books, his name, the brand he had spent 60 years building. He testified against Crystal Cathedral Ministries in bankruptcy court. A father testifying against the church his daughter now runs. A church his other son had been fired from. A family suing each other in federal court while the ministry collapsed around them. In March 2012, Sheila Coleman announced she was leaving Crystal Cathedral to start her own church. She cited a hostile work environment. Her own family had made it impossible to continue. The ministry was now a corpse, with relatives fighting over the remains. The bankruptcy judge had seen enough. He ordered the entire 34-acre campus sold to the highest bidder. And the buyer was not another Protestant church. It was the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange. The same Catholics Robert Schuller had never built. What happened next would erase his name from the building forever. November 17, 2011. The bankruptcy judge approved the sale. The Crystal Cathedral and its entire 34-acre campus were sold to the Roman Catholic Diocese of Orange. The price, $57.5 million. The board chose the Catholic bid for a specific reason. The diocese promised to preserve the building as a place of worship. But the worship would be fundamentally different from anything Robert Schuller ever imagined. Catholic Mass and Catholic liturgy. Catholic doctrine. A crucifix where Schuller's positive thinking once echoed through 10,000 panes of glass. The final Protestant service was held on June 30, 2013. The remaining congregation, now a fraction of what it had been, moved to a leased Catholic church while they searched for a permanent home. The Crystal Cathedral was gone. The Roman Catholic Diocese spent $29 million renovating the building for Catholic liturgy. They renamed it Christ Cathedral. The consecration ceremony was held on July 17, 2019. Thousands of Catholics gathered in the space where Robert Schuller once preached to 20 million television viewers. But Schuller did not live to see it. Here is what happened instead. Robert Schuller's wife, Arvella, died in 2014 at age 84. She had stood beside him since those first sermons at the drive-in theater. Robert was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 2013. He spent his final years in declining health, watching from a distance as everything he built was transformed into something he never intended. Robert Harold Schuller died on April 2, 2015, at a care facility in Artesia, California. He was 88 years old. His funeral was held outside the Crystal Cathedral. The building was closed for Catholic renovations. Read that again. The man who designed and built the cathedral, who raised $18 million to construct it debt-free, and who preached from that pulpit for 3 decades could not even have his funeral inside his own church. He is buried on the campus grounds. Church members are interred there as well. When the Catholic diocese bought the property, they agreed to maintain the graves. So Robert Schuller lies in the earth beneath a building that now hosts Catholic Massachusetts. A building that bears a different name. A building with a different cross on top. But wait, the hour of power still exists. Sort of. Here is what is left. Today, Robert Schuller's grandson, Bobby, continues a smaller version of Hour of Power from the Shepherd's Grove campus in Irvine, California. The broadcast that once reached 20 million viewers now reaches a fraction of that audience. The production budgets are gone. The orchestra is gone. The pageants are gone. The Crystal Cathedral still stands in Garden Grove. The sun still pours through 10,660 panes of glass. Tourists still visit. Catholics still worship there. But Robert Schuller's voice no longer fills the space. Robert Schuller invented the megachurch playbook. Positive message. Television broadcast. Spectacular building. No guilt. Mass appeal. Every megachurch pastor who followed walked the path he created at that drive-in theater in 1955. Joel Osteen preaches possibility thinking in the former Compaq Center in Houston. Rick Warren built Saddleback Church on the seeker-sensitive model Schuller pioneered. They all followed the template. Schuller wrote the manual. But the man who told millions to dream it and achieve it spent his final years in bankruptcy court, fired by his daughter, removed from his own board, testifying against his own church, watching his life's work sold to a different denomination. The prototype for every megachurch in America became a monument to how all of them can end. A family that once smiled together on television tore itself apart in public. A building constructed debt-free accumulated $50 million in liabilities. A broadcast that reached 156 countries shrank until it could barely fill a rented auditorium. Robert Schuller preached that with God all things are possible. He never preached about what happens when the money runs out, the family fractures, and the empire you built gets sold to the highest bidder. He is buried in the ground beneath a Catholic cathedral. The same ground he walked when it was just an empty lot in Garden Grove. The same ground where he built his tower, his church, and his dream. Now it belongs to someone else. And Robert Schuller is still there beneath the glass, beneath the cross he did not choose, waiting in the earth while strangers worship above him in a building that bears a different name. That is how the father of the megachurch movement ended. Not with triumph. Not with legacy. With a grave on property he no longer owned beneath a church he could not enter.